Hey guys, well here's a question I've been getting as well, which is what do you do with your leaf packs? Now everyone's got different sets of rules. Some places you're allowed to weld them solid, some places you can pin them, bolt them, drill them out, put a big bolt through the middle of them. Ideally you want these to be more level and straight across because it'll get you a lot more strength in your car. So there's definitely different means and ways to do that. Now the rules that I run though tend to be much more stock builds and you really can't do much. So basically what they say is you can have up to either 4 or 5 leaf clamps per side, and or actually really ultimately per set of leaves if you have them in the front as well on a truck. So what I got here, this is a 86 Chevy truck. It's a 3/4 ton, so it's already got a lot of springs here. I believe it's 7 with a helper at the base, so 8 total. If you guys want to watch the video and count that, you're welcome to. I believe that's correct. And what we're going to do here is we're going to change out the stock clamps with some aftermarket ones that I have here that will make this a lot stronger in the long run. So I've already taken the time ahead of this video to cut off the original spring clamps. This particular set only had 2, so it had 2 different types. On the front it had this style, which is where it has a bolt basically running across the top. It's got a pin at the base. The pin was just a placeholder in a little hole. So basically this bolt just goes across, you have a nut on that end, tightens it, and then it holds all the leaves in place. Keeps them from separating. So that's one style. The other style, I unfortunately don't have one together, but it's this style which actually hooks around the top. It has a firm, solid mounted pin at the base, and this piece just wraps around the top, and then there's a mirror image on the other side, and then this is what was on the back of this assembly. So I actually cut it off right here. Hopefully it shows up in the video. You can see where I actually cut that pin off. So what I did was I cut this in half first with an angle grinder, and then just got in a pair of pliers, and well, not pliers, a big screwdriver and a pry bar. Man, I can't talk today, guys. Sorry about that. And just spread it apart and broke it off. And then what was left was just the pin sticking out of the leaf pack. And unfortunately, before I had the idea to film this video, I'd already done that. So there's the pin where the pin was located, and I ground it all down flat. So now this is basically free floating at this point. There's nothing clamping these leaves together other than just the weight of the vehicle holding it down. So one thing I like to do is when you're doing this kind of a project and you're taking this apart, I always put a jack underneath. So in this case I just put one under the bumper to hold the height that I want. So if you want a higher bumper height, well, now is a great time when you got your clamps off to raise this up to whatever desired height you want, or lower it down to whatever height you want. I thought this gave it a nice stance. It's just a hair lower in the back, but it's still relatively stock appearing. And so that's what I'm going to set it at. And so I've already got that in place. And now that we've got that all that prep work done, now it's time to put the clamps on. Oh, one other thing is a lot of them will also have these plastic locator pads that go in between the leaves here. And what you're going to want to do is when you figure out where you want to put your next new set of clamps, is you want to ground them off. So right here you can see this one is still popping through. See that? Now on this one, I already took the angle grinder real quick and just shaved it off. So now that is flush. So in looking at this, I had to figure out where did I want to put my aftermarket brackets. Well, I've got this big helper spring, so I definitely want to utilize that. So one's going to go here, and then I want to figure out, where do you want it in the back. Everyone's kind of got their own strategy. On this particular pack, I thought on the 3rd notch right here seemed like a good medium between the big section as well as then the thinnest part. And then obviously, as your rules allow, by all means go crazy with it, whatever you guys want to do. But in this set of rules, I'm only allowed to do 4, so basically 2 per half of this pack. So I'm going to do 2 on the back, 2 on the front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do the back side here. I'm going to do one on the small piece. I'm going to do the one on the big piece. We'll do that, and then at this point, once that's all done, then it's just repeating that same process over again in all the different sections. So let's get to work. I'll set the camera down and show you what I do for the first set. Alright, so hopefully this all shows up well. So what I've got here is I got these from a website called etrailers.com. These are little metal brackets here that basically are used for trailer applications, so for leaf packs and mounting springs on a trailer. And so this is a 1/4 inch thick by, I think it's 1.5 inches wide. The max rules that I'm allowed is 2 inches by I believe it's 4 inches. So hopefully this is showing up. So I got a bunch of these. I'm going to have one on the bottom and one on the top. I liked this because it was a very cheap option. I don't even remember what the cost was, but I believe it was something like $1 a piece. It was way cheaper than if I bought the metal and tried to drill the hole in myself. It may be more, but check those guys out, etrailers.com. That's where I picked this up. And then I went to just the local hardware store and got a bunch of these bolts. Now the length is always going to have to vary, but this is a 1/2 inch round bolt because that's what the hole is in this particular metal piece. What you want to do is figure out the appropriate length that you need for your location. Now I already had predetermined where I wanted to put my bolts, and so I wanted one that basically was about at least 1/2 inch to almost 1 inch above and below the actual spring location. And you want to get something with extra threads, and you can always have a little bit extra bolt and then cut it off later if you want. Now when it comes to mounting all this, I like to have the threads point up. I figure it's just one less thing to potentially get caught on another vehicle or on something else on the track, and put the threads facing upwards and out of the way. Some people maybe are different, but I like to do that. I have not had any problems with it since. So what you want to do, you want to grab your bolts, and then I also have a nice big washer underneath each head here. So I'm going to drop them in. So I got it like this, alright? So now this is the bracket's ready to go. So what I want to do is, before I put the bracket on, is I want to get a C-clamp. I got a nice big one here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pre-clamp this leaf pack together. Now this might not necessarily be required, but I just like to do it because it makes it a lot easier to put the brackets on in the long run. And when you get to the helper spring, you'll see why. So you want to tighten that down. It's kind of drawing it in. I don't know how well it's showing up on the video, but it's drawing it in and together. Alright, so I got that tight. Now what I like to do, obviously because I have the bolts facing up, is I'll put them down, or put them up, and put the bracket on the bottom side, and just kind of get everything started. So you're going to take your other bracket, put that on top, make sure it's in both bolts, take another washer, drop that on to each bolt, and then take the nuts and tighten those up. You don't want to completely tighten them, you just kind of want to snug them up at this point, just so that way it holds itself together. Now, this next step is really kind of depends upon what your leaf pack actually looks like. So in this case, I've got only a little bit of room to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this bracket till it's about, I'd say it's a little over 1/4 inch away from the end of this particular leaf. And so I'm going to line that up so there's just this little bit of overhang. Apply the pressure at the base, and then just kind of snug up the nuts on the top. Now for these 1/2 inch bolts, they are 3/4 inch. So I've got a wrench and a big socket, and I like to start in the back. It doesn't really matter. Put the wrench on it and then start to tighten it. Sometimes this will want to twist on you, so make sure your alignment's still good. Don't be afraid to loosen it up and realign. And then I just work it back and forth. I start in the back, then go to the front, and go back to the back. And this way you just achieve a much more even draw between the two plates. If any of you are musicians and are drummers, it's kind of like tightening a drum head. You just want to do it nice and even on both sides, and then that way your plates are nice and level, and you really maximize your holding power because you increase the surface area touching there, you know. And it's just good to evenly distribute the weight between the two bolts. So you want to tighten it. You don't want to get too carried away, because these metal brackets will in fact actually start to bend once you start to really put the force on it. But you just crank these down. Okay, I think I got it. Looks good. Double check your clearance. Looks good. And at this point, just let off the pressure in your clamp. And there you go. 1 down, 3 to go. So now that we've got that on, you guys can, I'll give you a closer view. You can see that I left a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch on the back side there. And it's just all bolted tight. Got a little bit of extra bolts sticking out the top, that's what I want, and then I got the head on the bottom. And sometimes I have even more thread sticking through. This one was actually pretty good. So there you go. That is 1 down. Now we gotta just do a bunch more. So I'm gonna do the same thing on the front side, and then we'll go to the helper springs and we'll do that next. Alright, so I've already taken the time to do the front clamps. So now we're gonna finish up on the back here. What I previously mentioned was that I started on the outside and then I was going to work my way in. So that's exactly what I did. Now my reasoning behind that is, there's a couple of reasons actually. The first is that 1, this is just thinner and easier to get at, and it's a good one to practice on. But 2, that just helps hold the leaves together, because as you get down towards the bottom here, well, those leaves get thicker. At least on this setup they do. And as you try to clamp those down, it increasingly becomes more difficult to really get what you want with it. And sometimes you might end up with more of a bow if you don't do something like this first. I want to draw it more flat. So I do the outside first at the height I want and then work my way in. So now I've already done this one in the back and I've done 2 up in the front. I'll show that when I have better light. You can kind of see them up in there in the distance. I'll set the camera down and we're going to work on this one. Now as you can see, there's a pretty good gap there. It's about 1 inch. And I got to draw that last leaf into the rest of the pack, as well as kind of suck that pack together. So it takes a little bit of work. But this is definitely where that C-clamp comes in handy, because I mean you could just get super long bolts and just use the bolts to draw it all together. And actually what we're going to do is we're probably going to have to draw it in a little bit with the bolts. But the clamp just really kind of gets it lining up and you can get better angles and just makes life easier. So we're going to set the camera down and we're going to go ahead and work on this last leaf. Alright, so now I hope this shows up okay, because I'm kind of working behind the camera here. So the next step is what I got to do is take my C-clamp once again, expand it over to capture all these leaves, and then just kind of get it tight here, just snug it up. And then what I like to do is then take my plate and just make sure I got enough room to do what I want. This way I've got a little bit of room to adjust depending on my need. So I'm just going to have to go ahead, now that that looks pretty good, is just start clamping down on this thing. Now this is sometimes the easy part, sometimes the hard part. On these helper springs, it is most definitely the hard part, because these things get pretty tight real quick. But this is where having the clamp can sometimes make your life really easy. And again, you can just go ahead and get a long bolt and use these plates and just draw that in tight, and if that's your style, then go right ahead. I like to kind of get it all lined up and compressed a little bit before I go putting the plates on, because then it just allows me to have a better angle on when I finally clamp it. See, now it's getting really tough because I don't have a lot of leverage here on my C-clamp. So the ultimate goal is just to get it close. So right now I've still got probably a better part of a ½ inch gap, but honestly it's about good. It's going to crank on it just a little bit more. Okay, once again, now this time I got a little longer bolts, but it's the same concept. I'm going to put them on the bottom, drop my top plate on, line up the bolts, just kind of get it all put together, washers, get the nuts on it. Alright, so now alignment. You want to check front to back as well as side to side. Side to side is also important. You want to make sure it's as center as you can get it. The leaf pack, that is. Alright, so now they're all snugged up. Got my about 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit more. You can put it more towards the inside if that's what you want. It's your choice. I like to put it more towards the outside, only because I just feel that that just holds it a little better. Okay, and then just start taking some of the pressure off the C-clamp. And again, working my way back and forth, from front to back. Now, in this case, because I am still drawing it together, the clamp will become loose. And once it does that, just go ahead and pull it out of your way, because then it's just easier to work. See, now it's loose. Just pull that up out of your way. But go ahead and just keep on drawing it tight. Now, one thing to keep in mind, be careful to keep your hands clear if you can, for most of the time. Sometimes it's obvious that you gotta kind of hold your hands in place. Sorry guys, I'm working behind the camera, it's a little awkward, but just in case something breaks, when this plate rips, the bolt decides to snap because you didn't use a strong enough bolt or whatever, stuff happens. You better be careful a little bit. Alright, we just about got it. Now you just want to keep drawing that together until it's nice and tight. And usually you'll start to get a little bit of a bend in your plates, and at that point you've pretty much reached the potential strength that you got in the system. You might as well stop before you break something. In this case it's still drawing together, so I'm going to keep tightening. Alright, one last final check. And that is it. So now at this point you can go ahead and drop your jack, and there you are. New clamps on your leaf packs. Ready for the derby? Ready to tear it up. So there you go guys. That's how we do it here in the Alpha Rim Racing Shop. When we do our leaf clamps, that's how we do it. And obviously rules change from place to place, and modify this as you feel needed. Feel free to ask questions if you have them, and get creative with this. There's a lot of things you can do as well to help modify these other than just the clamps. But there you go. That's how you do a leaf pack with new clamps for your derby.